I'm delighted to hand over to today's chair, Raym Crow. Raym, over to you, and I'll be back in at the end. Enjoy the webinar, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. And good morning, everyone. First, I also would like to thank the sponsors for this webinar series. But their support makes it possible for make the webinar open and the recording open to everyone. And for my part, I'd like to thank OASPA for inviting me to introduce today's panel on OA funding models that provide alternatives to author charges. Over 900 people from 58 countries and all types of scholarly publishing organizations have registered for today's webinar. So there's certainly widespread interest in alternative open models and in the specific initiatives today's speakers will discuss. Over the past decade, author site fees, both APCs and BPCs, have become the prevalent mode of funding open access. And while such charges have increased the amount of OA content, the limitations and negative consequences of APC models have become increasingly apparent. For example, while author charges remove barriers for readers, they introduce a barrier to open access publishing channels for authors. And this inequity can only be partially addressed by discounts and waivers. And author charges pose practical economic challenges as well. While some assert that there's enough money in the system to support author charges, as a global model for OA, adopting APCs as a systemic solution would require a radical redistribution of cost across institutions. And whether you consider such a redistribution to be desirable or not, it's typically unworkable in practice. Although author charges can introduce price competition, competing effectively favors publishers with scale, which often means the large commercial publishers. Similarly, read and publish agreements, which package APCs, also favor larger publishers with the market power to command the interest of consortia and the resources to negotiate the agreements. All this has served to further entrench large commercial publishers and disadvantage societies and smaller publishers in competing for revenue and for authors. As we've also seen, this need for scale and an increase in publishing volume can raise editorial quality and predatory publishing issues. And finally, funder policies that valorize APCs have served to undermine the read value of content. And that devaluation poses challenges for open models that seek a broad base of support and don't focus exclusively on published value. Of course, recognizing the limitations of author charges is one thing, and developing viable alternatives is another. Fortunately, alternative approaches continue to evolve, and those include collective funding models that coordinate support across multiple institutions, subsidy or diamond OA and commons models that rely on financial and in-kind support, and conditional OA models, such as subscribe to open for journals, to fund the future, and direct to open for monographs that allow established publishing programs to migrate to OA. Which of these approaches or combination of approaches works best depends on the specific type of resource. For example, monographs have different requirements from journals, while existing subscription journals have different requirements than new born open journals. So a variety of approaches will be needed. That's why I'm especially happy to introduce today a panel that represents excellent examples of several alternative open models. As a pioneering subscribe to open publisher and contributor to the S2O community of practice, Vivian Berghahn of Berghahn Books will bring her perspective and experience in describing how Berghahn has adopted S2O for multiple journals in its portfolio, including Berghahn Open and Panthro. Evgeniya Lupova-Henry, Strategy and Resource Manager for Quartz OA, will describe how that initiative is implementing a platform cooperative, along with micropayment and crowdfunding capabilities to support scholar-led diamond journals. And finally, Judith Fathallah of Lancaster and Coventry universities and of the Open Book Collective Management Team will describe that initiative's innovative collective funding and discovery platform, including how the Open Book Collective coordinates support for multiple scholar-led publishers, as well as for the publishing infrastructure providers that enable them. Each speaker's bio is available on the OASPA website, so I won't repeat that information here, nor will I interrupt again until all of our panelists have had a chance to speak. After the speakers, Dimitri of KU11 will join us to help ensure that we get all of your questions answered in the Q&A. So now I'll turn control over to Vivian, who will be followed by Evgeniya, and then finally by Judith. Over to you, Vivian.
Thank you, Raym. Let me just share my slides. Great. Thanks again. I'm delighted to be here. For those of you unfamiliar with Subscribe to Open, I'll start with a brief overview before going into our initiative called Berghahn Open Anthro. To note, ours is a journal application of the model, so I should add that there are some great initiatives underway on the book side, such as Opening the Futures and the MIT Direct to Open, as well as Fund to Open, as Raym mentioned. The model Subscribe to Open is a simple one, and it aims to offer open access at the journal level by changing as little as possible. Libraries allocate funds by continuing to subscribe, using the same channels as before. And on reaching the threshold, the journal's current volume is published open access, and it stays that way, regardless of what happens in the future. Each year, the threshold is set and needs to be met for future volumes to be open access. There are a number of big benefits for Subscribe to Open. Above all, no APCs. Entire journals publish open access, and overall, it supports inclusive and equitable publishing practices. It offers cost neutrality for libraries and revenue stability for publishers. It reduces library admin for open access, and journals of all sizes have a chance to go to open access by setting their own thresholds. Authors, above all, from all over, of all article types, can publish open access this way. It offers them the freedom to choose where to publish. The model has made great strides in the last 5 years, and a community of practice has formed. It's an informal group that seeks to ensure bibliodiversity through the support of publications of all sizes. It's important to note that the early adopters of Subscribe to Open have been smaller society and non-for-profit publishers. From the beginning, the group consisted not only of publishers, but librarians, funders, and other intermediaries. The group meets monthly and has now grown to over 100 members, and it still maintains this diverse array of stakeholders. We encourage and welcome new members to join. So by way of background, Berghahn Books is an independent publisher in the social sciences and humanities. We have offices in Oxford and Brooklyn, New York. We were founded by my mother, who's an anthropologist by training, and we're still a family-run firm. My eldest brother and I joined over 20 years ago, and we're supported by 25 staff. We have an ambitious program for the small number of people that we are. Berghahn Open Anthro is our Subscribe to Open initiative, and we're now in our 4th year after successful pilots that ran from 2020 to 2022. Using Subscribe to Open, 15 of our core anthropology journals are now publishing their 2023 volumes open access. 13 of those have done so since 2020 as they were part of the original pilot. BOA is offered as a collection as well as single title. This collections approach got the attention of key libraries, and it offered the best incentives, while also gave us more stability, especially very early on when we were starting out. But this stability continues to be really important for all publishers when embarking on this Subscribe to Open initiative. We're thrilled to have ever more libraries supporting us this way. In addition, any library can subscribe at a single title level, with the same pricing parameters as before, and they are all contributing importantly to our success. As a frame of reference, the entire 1-year collection of these 15 journals costs €3,000, the average price of one cheap STM APC. Last year, Social Anthropology, the flagship journal of the European Association of Social Anthropologists, joined our collection. Its members voted overwhelmingly in a referendum to take the journal open access on their own terms via Subscribe to Open. They had long been unhappy with their previous publisher. They had only otherwise been able to offer open access via APCs and read and publish deals. This map shows why they wanted change. An APC publishing approach was not aligned with their values. Now that we have a number of years to learn from our adventures, here is some data across BOA. Usage has increased exponentially, 700% from 2019 when we were closed, and 200% during this first phase of being open from 2020 to 2022. While our readership is up significantly in our more traditional markets, it's up dramatically in regions of the world a publisher of our size struggles to reach. This initiative has allowed us to publish a huge number of articles of all types, fully open access with no APCs from the authors. It's supported over 1,000 authors across more than 60 countries. This is over 800 research articles and hundreds of other pieces and other supplementary forms that have accompanied these articles. Our goal is not only to support authors from all regions, and for us this includes peripheral, under-resourced European countries, but also of all career levels. All of our articles are averaging large readership numbers across the board. Our top article, as you can see here, 40,000 downloads, has some whopping statistics. This is a very specialized journal whose mission is to foreground Middle Eastern scholars and contribute to these underrepresented voices. And thanks to open access, now it can do so to a much, much wider audience. The two pieces at the end are our top non-research article downloads. This is to demonstrate the further value of Subscribe to Open in making important, but yet APC and eligible pieces available as open access. This is especially important for our journals, where the diversity of article types adds to their richness. The model continues to evolve as more publishers adopt it and more librarians support and help shape it. We continue to establish best practices around communications in order to best serve librarian and author needs. What data to provide to librarians and when? What benefits are most valuable? How to ensure funding compliance for authors in future volumes. It also remains a model dependent on library budgets and all the ups and downs that come with that. Funding diversification would be good in order to better support the libraries supporting us. Although supportive, most funders are yet to play a more active role in a model that promotes funder compliance for funded research without them paying for it. We are hopeful that they may support it more directly in the future, given that the model has not only answered their call for transformation, but done so more equitably than the APC models currently being funded. APC-driven models were once hailed as transformative. And while the amount of APC-driven OA now being published has indeed changed the publishing landscape, it's not without its downsides, as Raym touched upon in his intro. Consolidation, inequity, and editorial disruption. So in closing, here is what moving from APC to Subscribe to Open means for a society journal in the social sciences. OA publication patterns under Subscribe to Open have truly transitioned social anthropology and the 14 other journals in our collection. Now that is what I would call real transformation. Thank you.
Now we'll move on to Evgeniya.
Yes, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. And I'm here with my colleague Ambar, who is joining in the among the participants. And we're happy to present Quartz Open Access, which is an initiative, as Raym mentioned, to establish a platform cooperative that would connect independent Diamond open access journals with a supportive community of institutions and scholars. So the goal of Quartz Open Access is to make Diamond open access journals more financially sustainable and academic publishing as a whole more fair by facilitating institutional support. So why was this idea born? Well, of course, you all know already of the challenges that the academic publishing industry faces, but we mostly looked at the challenges that the Diamond open access journals face, as most of them have very limited access to funding and work a lot with volunteers, which also presents its own challenges. And they struggle to obtain institutional support. And on the other hand, it is also quite difficult for them, as we learned from talking to some journals, it is quite difficult to organize, because there are a lot of quite dispersed initiatives. So journals do try to mount some collective action to promote Diamond open access, but these initiatives are dispersed, and there is a lack of collective action or mechanisms that would facilitate that. And on the other hand, we also spoke with libraries, and well, it is also quite well known, I think, to many of you, that for libraries it is much easier to sign just a couple of contracts to have access to thousands of journals than it is to sign thousands of contracts with many independent journals, right? So the administrative burden of supporting open access journals is quite significant for the libraries. So we were interested in finding this way to, on the one hand, help bring together a lot of Diamond open access journals, and on the other hand, to find a mechanism that would facilitate this flow of funding from libraries to these Diamond open access journals. So this was our challenge, and this is why we came up with the idea of Quartz Open Access. So basically, the idea here is to bring all the as many as possible Diamond open access journals and publishers together in one platform. And on the other hand, to bring university libraries or funders and help them pledge funds to this whole community of journals. So not necessarily to specific journals at the start, but just to the whole community of journals. And the researchers are here a very important link then between the libraries and the journals, because Quartz OA is one of our tools, is the micropayment mechanism that would allow researchers to stream funds from their libraries to the journals that they are reading. So as a researcher, once you access a journal that is part of Quartz OA network, then through our tools, the funding from your library will be transferred to that journal as you are reading it. So this idea basically is built on two tools that we have. One is a micropayments plugin that the journals will have to install in order to receive payments. And we have an OGS extension available to facilitate that. And on the other hand, we also have a browser extension that researchers need to install on their computers, and that would connect to the wallet where the institutional funds are stored. And from that wallet, the micropayment browser extension would send funds to the Diamond open access journals that they are browsing. So in this way, we actually help libraries as well to support journals that are relevant to their researchers. So the journals that the researchers are reading and accessing to do their work, basically. So these tools facilitate that. And well, another thing that we were just discussing recently is to make this available not only to journals that are already part of the network or that have installed the plugin, but to make this available to a larger network of journals that maybe even are not yet part of our network, but that are part of, well, let's say, the directory of open access journals. So we can actually receive funds for these journals in their dedicated accounts. And then once these journals join the network, they can get access to their accounts. So, well, that's an idea that we are thinking about, and we will be actually happy to hear the community's thoughts on this. How you see this working, or if you want to share, we will be happy to hear your thoughts. And well, basically, the way it works right now, the role of journals and publishers is first to enable this micropayment mechanism to support these micro donations on their journals' websites. The role of libraries is to pledge funds to the whole community of journals. And then the role of researchers is to basically install this browser extension that would automatically send micro donations once they access the journals that are part of Quartz open access. So currently, the project is in its pilot phase. We do not yet have a huge community of journals. We have about 3-4 journals with whom we've been working and trying to implement this browser extension. The micro donations plugin. But for now, we have put on hold most of our efforts because we do not have funding to support our work at the moment. So our next step is to actually look for funding, apply for funding. That is, I guess, a common theme for many initiatives in this field, in the open access field in general. And we are currently as well establishing a foundation, not-for-profit association, not a foundation, in Spain, because at the moment we're registered as a private company, but we want to change that and to establish an association to be more in line with our values, but also to involve the community at some point in a more proactive manner in the decision making and the governance of the platform. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell. Quartz Open Access. Thank you, and I will be looking forward to the Q&A and to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeniya. Over to Judith.
Judith, please just unmute for us. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Is my screen shared correctly?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So my name is Judith Fathallah, and I'm here to introduce you to the Open Book Collective. As you can see, the sort of subtitle of this little talk is Equity, Diversity and Sustainability in Open Book Publishing, which gives you a little insight into the aims that we are trying to achieve. So firstly, I should tell you what the Open Book Collective is. It is a charity. We are currently in the process of formalizing our registration as a charity, which is a slightly long-winded process, but it will be completed soon. And it is also a digital platform. And through this platform, we enable our library and institutional members to support a range of small to medium OA book publishers via a membership model. Now, our key aim is to generate new revenue streams for open access book publishers and for service providers. By service providers, we mean those organizations that provide the vital infrastructures for OA book publishing to operate, such as Tote, which is a provider of high quality comprehensive metadata that publishers can enter their catalog into. DOAB would be another example of service providers. And to make it easier for librarians to support OA membership schemes. Obviously, we are a not-for-profit that is enshrined in our charter, so the OBC cannot be acquired for profit at any later date, as we have seen with some other initiatives in the OA book landscape. And it is based on a firm set of community-based values and an ethos of bibliodiversity. So we've already mentioned in the intro some of the major problems with book processing charges, the reason why we're doing this, or one of the reasons why they're doing this, but I like to sum them up as being expensive, inequitable, and entrenching. That's a verb, I guess. So they are book processing charges generally are around 10 to 11K for a single book for major publishing houses. And of course, they are most accessible to the kinds of senior permanently employed staff that are in richer institutions or in receipt of research grants, which, as well as being inequitable, we think is bad for academia, leads to a solidification of fields as the dominance of English and prestigious institutions and the accepted forms and genres of OA book publishing are repeated and re-entrenched. So we've got three kinds of member in receipt of support. Obviously, our libraries and supporting institutions are one category of member. And then our other categories of member are service providers for OA books, a diamond press. Diamond press is often scholar-led, so that's no charge to reader, no charge to author, and hybrid presses who are committed to the transition to at least 75% OA on their front list. A lot of our publishers, although they're all extremely high quality, are very small and are not financially able at this time to be a completely OA press. This is part of the transition that the OBC is existing to enable. So our offer to publishers, I think, is very clear and very attractive in that it generates this new income stream through the library membership program that many of our publishers are simply too small to operate their own individual library membership scheme. We massively simplify that workflow. We do the invoicing, we do the contracting and the payment flows, and we undertake a lot of outreach on their behalf. Many of our publishers would not have the capacity to do that by themselves. And we offer these robust OA infrastructures to deliver the financial resources to service providers as well. So why might libraries want to become members? Of course, we would like to imagine that we can simply appeal to the ethical imperative to support an OA book landscape that is equitable and diverse, but there is an element of pragmatism here as well, in that libraries need to demonstrate value to budget holders. For one thing, the OBC makes it very easy, fast, and simple to compare and contrast OA book offerings for local and global relevance to one's institution. We offer membership packages that are pre-selected. So, for example, one might choose to support all of our publishers, they might choose to support all of our service providers, or packages arranged by various other metrics, or libraries can create a bespoke package that is particularly suited to their needs. We also provide a guarantee of quality in the sense that our publishers, in order to become members, must have demonstrated their financial reporting practices, their governance practices, their high standards of peer review and metadata, Though, of course, we do expect librarians to do their own quality checks as well as they sign up. And as the OBC develops, we hope then that we will also serve as a guarantee of quality, whereby librarians can recommend a trusted group of OA publishers for their faculty to publish with. We make the workflow a lot simpler. And then returning to this ethical idea, some librarians, such as, for example, Peter Barr, have written very persuasively in outlets like UKSG and LSE blogs on the necessity for libraries to support a fairer and more equitable OA landscape as a whole, rather than simply an OA publisher or an OA initiative. So I'd like to invite you to explore our platform at openbookcollective.org. Of course, the catalogue and the books are open for everybody to use and explore, and also to follow us on Twitter at openbookcollect. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Thank you to all the speakers. And now we'll turn to some of the questions. We'll try to see if we can parcel them out to people. I think Demi is there. Is going to join us here. So Vivian, why don't we start with you? One of the questions was authors often have to, when they're publishing under a mandate, need to be assured that their article is going to be open. Since S2O is a conditional open model, how do you ensure that?
I think this is a great question, and sort of also demonstrates how this model has been evolving. And this is actually something that's come up over the years in the community of practice, where when we come together every month and we talk about things, and these are, the librarians in the community really sort of raise these issues. And I think there are a number of approaches we can take. So for instance, there's one approach which is, for those of us who work with JISC in the UK, part of the agreement, which is to ensure and guarantee a green OA route for authors, should they be in a future volume that then, for whatever reason, doesn't become full open access. And the other approach has been, again, another great example of how this model continues to evolve as these sort of very practical questions come up, which is this guaranteed open access approach, with which a number of publishers are starting now to introduce. And essentially what this means is, if a library is subscribing and their faculty is in line to be in the pipeline to be published in a journal as part of the arrangement, then they are guaranteed to have a gold open access publication when on publication, if it's down the road and for whatever reason that journal hasn't met its threshold. So I think, again, we're continuing to build and grow the model to responses and feedback that we're getting. And I think how we communicate thresholds and future offerings and openings has definitely been an area we continue to build on, and I think learn from and implement solutions for.
Thank you. Evgeniya, perhaps, I mean, there are a lot of questions for Quartz OA, and so we'll go through systematically, but one of the questions I think goes across some of them is, can you speak to how the micropayment model works? I mean, what kind of volume would you need to generate a material amount of revenue for the journals? So that's one, I guess one good place to start. How would that work?
Yeah, so that's a good question, but I think it's something that we would need to figure out as we go, because it depends on how many journals there are in the network. It also depends on how much funds we have available, how much funds the libraries are willing to dedicate, and that will also then reflect in the amount of micropayments that actually that makes sense. So this is all. We don't have a set answer to that. But what we were trying to pilot with the University of Amsterdam. So the University of Amsterdam Library agreed to pledge 2,500, if I remember correctly, euros over a certain period of time to any journal that is part of Quartz A. So what we discussed with them was that, well, we will invite initially, let's say, 20 researchers from the University of Amsterdam to install this plugin, and we will distribute these funds in their wallets that would be like equally in an equal amount. So every researcher would get about I don't remember exactly the numbers, but anyway, equal amounts, and these equal amounts will be sent then to in micropayments to any journals, Diamond Open Access journals that they read. And if there is something left and is not distributed, then we would redistribute this equally among all the journals that the researchers access. For example, so we would just donate manually, more or less, transfer the amounts to their to the accounts of these journals. But it is, so I understand it doesn't really answer the question about how much in micropayments would that be and so on. So, but that's something that we would need to figure out as we go. And as more and more pilots build up, then we would be able to see, well, what the outcome, the financial outcome for the journals is of this model.
Great, thank you. Judith, one of the questions for you is, could you speak to how OBC differs from knowledge and latch?
Well, yeah, it differs quite fundamentally from knowledge and large. Firstly, in the sense that the aim here is to support a more equitable landscape for OA books, and that the library members sign up to support publishers and service providers rather than signing up to unlock individual books. And the other kind of fundamental aspect is the fact that it's guaranteed to remain not-for-profit. It's guaranteed to remain communally governed. That's one of the reasons why we decided to incorporate it as a charity, so that it can't be acquired later by any for-profit initiatives. But I think that the key point here is that it's a collective. We're not trying to open individual books. We're trying to support OA publishers and service providers to do the work that they do without the need for book processing charges.
Danny, do you have any questions there?
Yeah, I think I really liked actually the very first question that came in, which is a question for Vivian, is how do you grow revenue with the subscribe to open model? I suspect indeed it was a question that I also have, and I think that's the answer why not every single publisher adopts this model, but you will undoubtedly be able to answer that.
Well, it's the old-fashioned way, which is the really, really hard way, which is one library at a time. And I think this is also ultimately what this model, and the kinds of publishers that are involved in this model, we're the publishers who are engaged at this very, very one-by-one growth model. We aren't these huge publishers who come in with a huge big deal and sweep up entire swaths of subscriptions in one time. We are really in the trenches, building our lists up, working closely with our editors, editorial boards, outreach to librarians. It's really about sort of building on those relationships. That is how we build it. And so this has been part of this model as well. So we gain new subscribers the same way we would as if it were a closed subscription. We go and we have to make a very strong case as to why and how this journal needs to be in the library collection, supported by advocacy from members, from editorial board members. And so I think this has been an important part of the model. So it is a growth model. As a publisher, one has to demonstrate value, and the journals, really have that. And I think this is why the discipline approach has worked well for us, because as an anthropology publisher, we could go in there and speak to the librarians. And I will say we've definitely seen a lot of support coming in because of the open access element. This has been seen as an added value. So I think it's really been an important undertaking for us, but it's hard work. And I think it's really a return to the old-fashioned publishing of a bygone era that I don't think is also necessarily a bad thing, and why I think it remains a model that's also maybe even therefore more accessible, albeit with a ton of work, especially when you have a small team like many of us have. But we're trying.
Evgeniya, maybe you could speak to, you talked about the micropayments component. Do you have other ways of structuring your crowdfunding within the platform? You accommodate payments from libraries, obviously. So do you have online offers, crowdfunding offers separate from micropayments, or is it all micropayments?
Yeah, so we were thinking as well to have, indeed, a crowdfunding initiative, let's say, that the researchers maybe, or journals could launch themselves to raise funds for a certain project or for a cause. And that, that would also, and donations would also be possible. And another source as well of micro donations, it does not necessarily only have to come from the libraries, but researchers themselves, if they wish to, they can also add funds to their wallets and donate from their own funds to journals that they read, but also to these community initiatives that would be launched by journals or by other researchers.
Thank you. Judith, I'm gonna there's a set of 3 questions. I'm gonna read them to you so I get them right. The first one is fairly broad. How do you see the OA transition for books? So we can set that one aside. You can address that. But specifically, can a consortium of libraries be part of OBC? And is there a strategy for publishers from the global south?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll kind of take that one by one. I'm just looking at my notes here. So firstly, I think that while we are at a transitional moment, this is also a moment where for real opportunity regarding the transition for OA books. We've often said that the reliance on book processing charges is in many ways a failure of imagination. It's a failure to imagine alternative ways of making this landscape sustainable. And at this moment, as we can move away from the entrenchment and institutionalization of BPCs if we have the support, and towards other models which actually represent a real possibility for change within academic publishing, and I think within academia. And then number 2, yes, is the short answer. Consortiums will be able to become members, and we'll be approaching them directly in due course. And we're also very keen to hear from any consortia who are interested in becoming members. And then the third aspect is there a strategy for publishers from the global south. Okay, so I talked about bibliodiversity before. We already have on board with us a publisher called African Minds, which is a small OA publisher with headquarters in South Africa that is dedicated to producing unsupported scholarship of importance to the African continent. But that aspect of support of publication in the global south is a key focus of what's called the Open Book Futures Project. So the Open Book Futures Project is the successor to the COPIM project, which is what the OBC was developed as part of. So the Open Book Futures is a project that has just received another 3 years of funding from now. And we're working with DOAB, operas, and also in partnership with Continental Platform and silo, I'm never quite sure how quite to pronounce that, to consult with and understand the needs of publishers in the global south. So yeah, it's a big area of concern, and it's something that we're going to be exploring, meeting those needs in this next, I guess, success. I don't want to say phase, in this successor project to Copium of Open Book Futures.
Great, thank you.
Maybe I can jump in with a riff on a question. That the question actually is very detailed, but I would like to open it up so that all three panelists maybe can answer. The question actually is, do you envisage the Diamond Open Access route to be available for new journals, or to only help hybrid journals to transition? And the idea that I had was to open it up a little bit to not only talk about journals, but also about books, and to indeed question, is there a particular, whether you go for the conditional open access or your Diamond Open Access route, is there like a type of journal or type of publisher that is more better suited for a particular model rather than another one, or not? Or does it work across the board? That's my question to basically all three of you.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in to say, I think, I do think it's important that these models can support new initiatives. I think, okay, on the one hand, everybody says there are enough journals in the world, do we need another one? But, if there is a need, and I think it is important to build these models. And there is, for instance, UT Pre-Press, University of Toronto Press is now trying to subscribe to Open with a brand new journal. I mean, launching a brand new journal is hard no matter the model. And I think, I think how you create parameters and determine success is important, and will really determine whether or not you as a publisher and as a journal feel that you've successfully been able to launch as a new journal. But I think, again, if you really are building from the bottom up, I think it should be possible, the same way that one can add new subscriptions to an already existent journal. So I do think it's important and hope that it is possible. I think we need to find that way to create and continue to be able to grow and create innovative publications.
I'll jump in with regard to books. In short, yeah, we do think that's a possibility, in that one aspect, as I mentioned, the OBC is a charity, and we have something called a collective development fund that's partly been funded by our new funding that we've just had from our grants, but it's also, in the future, particularly, it's going to be a percentage of the membership fees that both our publisher members, our service provider members, and our library members contribute. So we're building this collective development fund to which new publishing initiatives can apply, and also publishers looking to build capacity. And definitely Diamond OA would be something that we'd be looking to support there. And we're also providing, as part of the Open Book Future project, other resources, toolkits, and so on, aimed at providing resources for new initiatives, so that people are not constantly starting from scratch. We think that resource sharing is something that's going to be very important in this landscape. So yeah, we think there are possibilities for that. It just requires a bit of, again, imaginative thinking.
Yeah, so from our perspective, for us, I think the question is a little bit different, because we are from the start only focusing on Diamond Open Access journals. So, but at the same time, we know that, well, some journals that are looking to transition to a Diamond Open Access model would also, well, actually require an additional source of funding. So it could be also we see the potential as well to actually opening this up maybe to also journals in the process of transition, so that we could help bring some additional funds there. But then, yeah, there are a lot of other than considerations. So what are then the criteria how these journals would need to fulfill in order to be considered a transitioning journal? So how do we actually implement this in practice? that's an interesting question, but we wouldn't really. For the moment, we are not yet looking into that, but we do see a need to actually broaden maybe our perspective on what kinds of journals we are inviting, let's say, to be part of our network.
Thank you. Evgeniya, jump in if you have any other questions. Like a question for Vivian. ADP Science recently announced that their one of their journals didn't make the threshold for open. What, if anything, does that tell us about the model, and also about S2O? And also, what have you seen over the several years since you've been offering the model? What trends do you see in terms of acceptance and uptake of the offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a conditional model. So what they've done is what, every publisher said will have to happen if for whatever reason the threshold isn't met. I think every publisher is trying extremely hard for that not to happen. But of course, keep in mind, these are also publishers publishing a range of journals for a range of societies. So there are many sort of priorities then therefore at play as to what makes then transitioning to open access important. And I think so to the question around the disciplinary elements, I think for sure some disciplines either aren't ready or interested. I think this is a question we have around the humanities. And there's something that Project Muse is looking at, and how to bring open access in a way. So I think it really does show that this model is diverse and varied and representing a whole range. And I think that's a good thing. We need diversity of models. So whether or not this model becomes ever more diverse, although we've talked about the need for there to be some basic understanding because so it doesn't get too confusing. But I think ultimately this is still a very young model that's developing, and publishers are experimenting and understanding. And I don't think, I think if anything, this speaks to the way the model can work and needs to continue to grow, and does so in a very sort of open way. I think the way they expressed the decision that needed to be made was very, sincere and good, and spoke to the real challenges they had and the wish to, if they could have. So I think it really, there's a lot we're still learning, and for sure some journals, for them it may not be the right model, but then hopefully there's another model.
Jimmy, do you have a question for you?
Yes, maybe another. It's actually more two suggestions that I want to conflate in the chat. I'm not so certain whether the panelists will be able to answer that, but it might be worth considering. It's like the two suggestions are, instead of these alternative models, why don't we even go for another way, for instance, to work more with endowments, that people leave money to certain journals in their will, or to ask players like OpenAI who use open access material and who would really benefit from the fact that there is open access material for their own products. Why don't publishers go and talk to these companies and say, why don't you help fund us? So those are the two suggestions. I'm not certain whether any of you wants to come in, but perhaps you won't.
Well, one reason is it makes it difficult to plan, because you can't depend on the reliability of those payments into the future, or how much you're going to get at any different time. So, for an OA book publisher that wants to schedule a publication schedule, some years into the future, as it is with books, it's kind of unreliable. And by the way, a lot of our publishers do use a kind of piecemeal funding model. So they may well have some donation or some small amount of endowment from somewhere. It doesn't have to be quite a small amount, but by and large, we think that it makes it too difficult to plan a sustainable business model. I don't know how it is for journals.
Yeah, I mean, I think stability is key. And I think this is why, really, indeed, the sort of going and understanding. And I think this is why when we apply and determine, is a subscribe to open journal, how is it going? I think a lot of it is also the experience we have as journal publisher in general. Do we have a good sense of how is this journal continuing in a way that's healthy and successful and sustainable, right? So these are sort of value judgments we're making, no matter the model. And I think for subscribe to open, that's how it is applied as well. I do think, of course, finding diverse forms of funding in the subscribe to open model so that the pressure isn't always on the librarians wouldn't be a bad thing, as I touched upon, whether that's from funders. I think then there's a licensing question, whether it's CC BY or whether or not NC components are important for models where the kind of income and the way the revenue streams are coming in aren't quite enough. I think these are then bigger questions that, again, we need to really tackle, because I think some of these models came about before, much earlier on. So I think finding diverse streams, and if a company is making revenue off swaths of materials, then sure, I think there's definitely a licensing question there to be had.
Maybe one more. Question that I have a personal, very strong opinion about as a librarian, but I'm not going to be answering this question. But the question is, are librarians not running a risk of being prescriptive for the researchers if they produce lists of open access journals? And I think what is meant, or the way I understand the question, is like if we decide to support some of a particular funding model, we're pushing a particular funding money, we're pushing a set of journals or a set of books, a set of publishers. Is that our job as librarians to push that on our readers or not?
Well, to an extent, first of all, librarians already do that with their choice of subscriptions, but also, like with regard to the OBC, these are the kind of publishers we think they should be supporting. Like I said, we've done that due diligence that our publishers have met extremely high standards for things like metadata and peer review and governance and funding models. And as much as we would expect librarians to do their own sort of quality checks, in terms of them maybe recommending our publishers to their researchers, that's a feature, not a bug. We want that to happen because these are the kinds of publishers that we think are going to contribute to a more equitable and diverse publication landscape for OA books. It's not as though the major commercial publishers need any more support.
I think it's such a complex landscape. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, publishers and librarians alike, in how to guide researchers through this ever complex landscape, because they're also hearing from every direction around requirements and mandates. So I do think there's an important role for librarians, that have always played in terms of negotiating and navigating publishing more generally. And I think it's a good thing for that to be there, I think, of course, on balance, and then it's on the publishers to really sort of make the case as to why a certain library should support them or their program. I think the key is then also just having a diverse array and not to put everything into one form, the way we've seen with the read and publish deals very early on, that really sort of vacuumed up all the resources in a way and created a real challenge early on in open access in terms of how to fund different models and think beyond APCs.
I also think that with open access, it's really hard to say that you, as librarians, by supporting certain open access journals, you somehow will be guiding or pushing researchers to read those journals. So they are open access anyway, support you there, whether you support them or not. So I don't really see, how librarians would be pushing anyone or incentivizing anyone to read, some journals, especially when they're open access. I do see how it is done when the journals are subscription journals. So So yeah, I think that with open access journals, that actually will not, it's not really the right question, or it's not really a problem of limiting researchers or directing them towards certain resources.
I agree with you with the reading part. I just wanted to comment on that, of course, we push orders on the publishing part. If we have like read and publish deals with certain publishers and not others, then we inadvertently or consciously, we push orders in a certain direction. Yeah.
One other question I think that really goes to the whole panel here is how do each of the models of your models, to what extent do they address cost? I mean, the issue is that there was an idea originally that APCs would introduce price competition, and that hasn't. We have seen the escalation of APC prices, so that hasn't worked out. But with S2O and with the micropayments and also with OBC, how do your various models relate to the underlying publication costs or help?
Sorry, how do our various models relate to the underlying publication cost?
Yeah. How do they help keep the cost down? BPCs through, so the cost of publishing through Open Book Collective, for example, as opposed to other BPC models.
Our publishers are not publishing through the OBC. They're running their own programs, and the revenue that they receive from the OBC or through the OBC, well, one of the criteria for membership is that has to be used to support OA book publishing. So they can't, for example, take the revenue that they receive through the OBC and use it to publish something closed and then advertise that. But I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Well, it's a fairly broad question. So it was basically, to what extent do these models have keep publication costs down, as opposed to APCs? Although even if that's not, like you said, you don't directly control costs, but it's.
But we don't prescribe precisely how publishers use the revenue that they get through the Open Book Collective, except that it has to be for the publication of OA books. I mean, they all have their own individual business models. So the exact details of how that works out will depend on the publisher. But they couldn't use it for anything except the publication of more OA books.
Well, I think with the Subscribe to Open journal, I mean, it's the same conversation around subscription prices that publishers have with libraries, and one has to justify the annual subscription costs, and if there are any year-on-year increases, also be very clear and transparent around that. And I think, that also shows that it's important to then keep having those conversations and to really contribute. But I think ultimately, what the value proposition of Subscribe to Open is that a library can subscribe for, in our case, 245 euros and contribute to their faculty being able to publish open access instead of paying an APC fee. So in the case of social anthropology, I mean, a Wiley read and publish APC is what, 2,500 euros an article, right? So I think what we're looking at is sort of the overall single APC cost versus looking at these sort of subscription models where it's pooled together, of course, but the library cost itself and the value that's being returned is, as the model argues, far more equitable and accessible, which is also part of the model. It's trying to make it accessible for more libraries to then also participate and contribute in transitioning journals to open access in a way that many of these large read and publish deals don't make possible, whether it's because of income, administration, or complexity. So I think in that way as well, not only does it keep costs down, but it also means that more libraries can contribute and participate.
Oh, well, in terms of Quartz, I don't think that for us it's a question of how our model will influence the costs, because it's an additional source of funding basically for Diamond Open Access journals, and I think in a way that their costs may increase because they will have funds to pay volunteers. So for instance, that's work that is not accounted for, it doesn't cost anything to Diamond Open Access journals because it is performed by volunteers. But now if they have funds to actually pay for that work, it may result in them having these costs, but I don't think that's a bad thing.
There were a couple of questions that are model specific. So I'll just, one is for you, Evgeniya, asking whether you're concerned or whether any of the libraries or researchers are concerned about using plugins as in order to affect micropayments, or is there another channel besides the plugins? The way to process them?
For now it's just a plugin, but maybe I can actually hand over here to my colleague Ambar, who is also joining us here because he is more into the technology part. And actually, I would like to maybe leave the webinar now because I have to pick up my son at his after school. So I will hand over to Ambar, and thank you very much. So I will say bye to everyone. It was a pleasure to be here.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Good. So the plugin is the first option that we developed, and that's because this is what other web monetization initiatives are doing. So giving small quantities of money for the content you are browsing is not new. Other people are trying to do it for creative content, for instance. But of course, there are alternatives. We could use the data that the libraries have, because sometimes researchers access the journals through the university's VPNs or the library's internet, and we could develop tools to study this traffic and give libraries this information on which journals to donate to. And other things that we were considering is maybe the researchers are just comfortable running some program that tells them about their browsing history and which open access they could support with open access. But I think they will be more hesitant to share the browsing history or to run a program that reads that than just installing a plugin. After all, what we believe is that the early adopters will be excited about this, and actually they are willing to help us installing a plugin. And once our proposal proves to be helpful to journals and to libraries, either we can try to develop easier tools for the not so early adopters, or convince them that that is worthy to install the plugin. After all, we are not missing, I mean, we are offering the researchers the opportunity to give money to the journals that are meaningful to them. And if that's a good enough value proposition for them, probably they should choose to install the plugin. If they don't care about that, we cannot convince them to do any other small actions. So anyways, we are open to your suggestions. And thank you for the question, because it's key for us to succeed to have the participation of the researchers.
Thank you, Ambar. And Vivian, there's one specific to S2O again, which is kind of fundamental to the model. So I think we want to get it asked, which is if a S2O journal doesn't reach its target for the year, what happens? Does it revert to a regular subscription? RMP agreement, what happens?
Indeed. So if it doesn't reach, then the future volume doesn't become open access. But anything that has been published open access, so if in the first year the threshold is reached, everything that's published open access remains open access, and then it's the future volume that's then closed for that year. But publishers would keep trying again. So I think that's really the idea of the model. And although it's not ideal to have so much back and in and out and on and off, I think this is why also many of us are looking at these sort of multi-year agreements in order to give us sort of longer term stability. It is ultimately a conditional model. But whatever has been funded and supported and opened stays open, and that's absolutely fundamental to the model.
Well, I think there are some additional questions left, but some of them are fairly long and dense. I think there might be we can ask the panelists to respond to those offline. But before we close, do we need the panelists to have any final remarks they'd like to make? And Evgeniya, if you have any questions.
I have no question, just appreciation for the presentations. Thank you.
Okay. Well, that I will thank each of our panelists, Vivian, Judith, Ambar, and Evgeniya. We appreciate your presentation. We look forward, we appreciate you being willing to answer additional other questions after the webinar is over. So thank you very much, and thank you everyone for joining the webinar.
Thanks for coming, and thank you for all your questions as well.
Thank you, Raym. Thank you, panelists. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. A quick reminder that the recordings will be available in the next few days. And so long as you're registered, you will receive an email to let you know that the recording is ready. We'll keep this webinar open maybe just for a few more seconds to allow you to grab any last minute resources or links. Otherwise, thanks again for joining us. A big thank you to our sponsors, and we'll see you on our next one. Thank you.